The 2000s were filled with legendary quarterbacks. Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees. We used to watch gods on Sunday. But for every elite signal caller, there was also a quarterback who completely fell apart. From high-profile busts to veterans who had no business starting, this decade also gave us some of the worst quarterback performances in NFL history. These are the worst quarterbacks in each season from 2000 to 2009. 2000, Akili Smith. By the time the 2000 NFL season rolled around, Akili Smith was already teetering on the edge of full-blown bust status. The number 3 overall pick in the 1999 NFL Draft, Smith was supposed to be the franchise quarterback the Cincinnati Bengals desperately needed. Instead, he delivered an unforgettably horrible season that effectively ended his NFL career. Smith started 11 games for the Bengals in 2000, and it quickly became clear that he was not going to rebound from his awful rookie season. His numbers were shockingly bad. A 44% completion percentage, which was dead last among qualifying quarterbacks, 3 passing touchdowns to 6 interceptions, a passer rating of 52.8, and a 2-9 record as a starter. According to one of his former offensive coordinators, Smith wasn't exactly a football genius, nor was he much of a worker. He scored a 16 out of 50 on his first Wonderlic attempt, and was allergic to watching film and studying playbooks. The Bengals' offense was completely unwatchable under his leadership, so bad they were shut out in 3 of his first 6 starts. And by the end of the year, Cincinnati had seen enough, and Smith was benched for Scott Mitchell, who was actually somehow even worse. Akili Smith finished his entire career with 5 touchdown passes, 13 interceptions, and a 3-14 record. One of the worst stat lines ever for a top 3 draft pick. And perhaps the worst part of the entire Akili Smith saga? The fact that the Bengals could have traded the 3rd overall pick in 1999 for the entire New Orleans Saints draft, so that the Saints could move up to draft Ricky Williams. Idiotically, they turned it down to select a jabroni who didn't even belong in the league. But of course, I can't leave this year behind without mentioning the great Ryan Leaf. His NFL career was already a disaster heading into 2000. But like Akili Smith, this was the year he officially cemented himself as one of the biggest busts in league history. After missing all of 1999 due to a shoulder injury, Leaf returned to start 9 games for the San Diego Chargers in 2000. And to say he struggled would be an understatement. 50% completion, 11 touchdowns to 18 interceptions, a passer rating of 56.2, and a 1-8 record as a starter. Leaf's attitude problems, lack of work ethic, and terrible decision-making made him a nightmare for coaches and teammates. He threw 4 interceptions in 1 game against the 49ers and eventually got benched in favor of Moses Moreno, a name most NFL fans have never even heard of. By the end of 2000, the Chargers released Leaf entirely, eating millions in dead cap just to get rid of him. While Akili Smith was statistically worse, Leaf's off-the-field problems and high-profile bust status make him the even more infamous failure. Real quick, if you love this type of content, subscribe so you can always get the videos as soon as they drop. Back to the video. Moving on to 2001, Chris Weinke had already taken an unconventional path to the NFL. After becoming the oldest player ever to win the Heisman Trophy in 2000 as a 28-year-old quarterback for Florida State, he entered the league as a 29-year-old rookie with the Carolina Panthers in 2001 after being taken in the 4th round. The Panthers thought his maturity and experience would translate into instant success, but as you might be able to guess, they were wrong. Instead, Weinke was Winky, delivering one of the worst quarterback seasons of the decade, leading Carolina to an abysmal 1-15 record, the worst in its franchise's history. Weinke started 15 games in 2001, and while he wasn't dealt the best hand with a weak supporting cast, his performance was absolutely brutal. 54% completion, 11 touchdowns to 19 interceptions, a passer rating of 62, and a 1-14 record as a starter. Ironically enough, his only win came in Week 1 against the Vikings. From there, the Panthers rattled off 15 straight losses, making for one of the most disastrous seasons ever for a rookie quarterback. Instead of assuming Weinke would enter the league and be good right away just because he was old, the Panthers probably should have considered why he only resorted to football after a failed baseball career. Weinke put the dagger in his own career during the final game of the season, completing just 15 of 36 passes for 144 yards and 3 interceptions, while receiving an absolute clobbering from the eventual Super Bowl champion Patriots. The Panthers' offense was completely lifeless because their Weinke just couldn't perform. Carolina benched him for Rodney Peete in 2002 and moved on to Jake Delhomme shortly after. Weinke remained in the league for a few years as a backup, but was never again viewed as a starting caliber quarterback. While Weinke led the worst team in football, Jon Kitna also had one of the most statistically painful seasons of the decade. The Cincinnati Bengals brought him in to stabilize the quarterback position following the Akili Smith disaster, but instead he became a turnover machine. 54% completion, 12 touchdowns to 22 interceptions, and a passer rating of 61.1. While Kitna would eventually redeem himself and carve out a 14-year career, including a stretch in Detroit, his 2001 season was easily his worst showing. And speaking of the Lions, by the 2002 NFL season, Detroit was desperate for a franchise quarterback. After years of both mediocrity and boredom following Barry Sanders' retirement, they selected Joey Harrington with the number 3 overall pick in the 2002 draft, hoping he would turn the franchise around. Spoiler alert, he didn't. Instead, he set the tone for what would become one of the most disappointing careers for a highly drafted quarterback in the 2000s. Harrington started 12 games for the Lions in 2002 and struggled mightily. 2,294 yards, 50% completion, 12 touchdowns to 16 interceptions, a passer rating of 59.9, and a 3-9 record as a starter. For a rookie quarterback, growing pains are expected, but Harrington looked like a fish out of water. He struggled with accuracy, frequently missing open receivers, and his decision-making was poor, often throwing into tight coverage. His completion rate was the worst in the NFL among qualified passers. His worst stretch came late in the season when he threw 10 picks over a 6-game stretch. Detroit lost his final 6 starts, and Harrington's confidence appeared to be completely shot by season's end. To be fair, the Lions didn't give him much help. The offensive line was shaky, and his top receiver was Bill Schrader. Still, good quarterbacks are supposed to elevate bad teams, and Harrington did precisely the opposite, sinking Detroit. While he remained the Lions starter for several more seasons, his 2002 rookie campaign was a sign of things to come. A quarterback who would never live up to his draft status and ultimately become one of the most forgotten and under-discussed busts of the decade. On to 2003, Kordell Stewart's days as an NFL starter were numbered. Once an electrifying dual-threat quarterback known as Slash with the Pittsburgh Steelers, Stewart had already begun to fade out of relevance. After losing his starting job in Pittsburgh, he signed with the Chicago Bears, hoping to revive his career. But on account of the fact that he was a Chicago Bears quarterback, he sucked, marking the true end of his run as a viable NFL starter. He put up a completion rate of just 50%, 7 touchdowns to 12 interceptions, a 56.8 passer rating, and a 2-5 record as a starter. Stewart started the season as Chicago's QB1, but his play was so abysmal that he was benched on multiple occasions. Both his completion percentage and passer rating were the worst in the NFL among qualified passers. His most god-awful performance came in the very first game of the season during a 49-7 loss against the 49ers, where he completed just 14 of 34 passes for 95 yards and 3 interceptions. Benched in Week 7 for Chris Chandler, the Bears got the same results from an aging Chandler and ended up reinserting Stewart in Week 12. After a brief return to the lineup, he was benched again in December in favor of Rex Grossman, marking the end of his tenure in Chicago. For a player who finished 4th in MVP voting and led the Steelers to the AFC Championship game just 2 years earlier in 2001, Stewart's rapid decline was shocking. His 2003 campaign was so bad that no team ever gave him another shot as a starter, finishing his career in Baltimore as a backup. A brutal fall from grace. And while Kordell Stewart's 2003 was a complete disaster, shockingly enough, Drew Brees was also dangerously close to being labeled a bust in San Diego. Before becoming the future Hall of Famer we know today, Brees struggled in his early years, and 2003 was his low point. He completed just 58% of his passes, threw 11 touchdowns to 15 interceptions, put up a passer rating of 67.5 and a 2-9 record as a starter. Brees was nowhere near the elite passer we associate with the Saints, but rather an undersized QB struggling with deep throws and turnovers. In Week 10, after a 1-7 start, the Chargers lost faith in Brees and benched him for a 41-year-old Doug Flutie. This prompted San Diego to acquire Phillip Rivers in 2004, signaling they were ready to move on from Brees entirely. Of course, Brees would later prove everyone wrong in New Orleans, but in 2003, he was one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. And in 2004, the Miami Dolphins made a massive mistake when they traded a second-round pick for A.J. Feeley. Hoping he could be their quarterback of the future, Feeley had shown flashes as a backup with the Philadelphia Eagles, rattling off 4 straight wins as a starter in 2002 while filling in for an injured Donovan McNabb. But when given a chance to be the Dolphins starter, he quickly showed that he was a far cry from a franchise-caliber quarterback. Miami flip-flopped between him and backup Jay Fiedler, but Feeley started 8 games, and his performances were downright disastrous. 54% completion, 11 touchdown passes to 15 interceptions, a 61.7 passer rating, and a 3-5 record as a starter. Feeley's decision-making was atrocious, and he had a knack for throwing pick sixes at the worst possible times. In fact, he threw 5 pick sixes that season, which was more than any other quarterback. He often looked lost in the pocket, taking unnecessary sacks and forcing bad throws into coverage. One of his worst moments came in Week 13 against the Bills, where he threw 3 touchdowns but also 5 interceptions, including a game-sealing pick six in the final minutes. By the end of the year, it was obvious Feeley was not the answer in Miami, and the Dolphins cut ties with him after just 1 season. The Dolphins quarterback carousel continued, and the second-round pick they wasted on him made the failure that much worse. Now, while A.J. Feeley was unquestionably the worst starting quarterback in 2004, Eli Manning's rookie year was pretty awful too. The number 1 overall pick in the 2004 draft, Manning struggled massively in his first season with the Giants, looking surprisingly unprepared for the NFL. He completed only 48% of his passes with 6 touchdowns to 9 picks, a 55.4 passer rating, and a 1-6 record as a starter. Manning replaced veteran Kurt Warner midway through the season, and while the Giants hoped for a spark, Eli looked overwhelmed. His worst game came in Week 14 against the Ravens, where he threw 2 interceptions and managed just 27 passing yards on 18 attempts before being benched. While Eli Manning went on to become a 2-time Super Bowl MVP, his 2004 season was one of the worst performances of the decade. But the rookie campaign for the number 1 pick in the following draft was even worse. You see, the San Francisco 49ers were in desperate need of a franchise quarterback heading into the 2005 draft, and they believed they found their guy when they selected Alex Smith with the number 1 overall pick. Coming out of Utah, Smith was seen as a smart, athletic quarterback with a high football IQ. But in his rookie season, he looked anything but that. Instead, he made the 49ers look like idiots for using the first pick on him, putting up historically awful numbers. A completion percentage of 51, 1 touchdown to 11 interceptions, a 40.8 passer rating, and a 2-5 record as a starter. Yes, you heard that right. 1 touchdown and 11 interceptions. Smith was completely overwhelmed in his first NFL season. He struggled with accuracy, pocket presence, and decision-making. I mean, he struggled with practically everything, really. He didn't play quite enough to qualify, but if he had, his 40.8 passer rating would have been one of the worst of all time. And his 1-11 touchdown to interception ratio is almost unthinkable for a number 1 overall pick. His worst performance came against the Indianapolis Colts in Week 5 when he threw 4 interceptions and lost a fumble in a brutal 28-3 loss. The 49ers offense was completely inept with him under center, and San Francisco finished 30th in scoring with 14.9 points per game that season. Of course, Alex Smith's story didn't end in 2005. After years of development, he eventually became a solid starter and even a 3-time Pro Bowler. But in 2005, he looked like an all-time bust. Downright painful to watch and nearly derailing his NFL future in one season. And many 49ers fans were convinced their team had made a massive mistake drafting him over Aaron Rodgers, which it was. Moving on to 2006, just as they had been for most of the century, the Oakland Raiders were in quarterback purgatory. After the disastrous Kerry Collins era, they turned to Andrew Walter, a 3rd-round pick out of Arizona State in 2005, hoping he could develop into a capable starter. But the Raiders should have known Walter would turn in a disaster of a season just based off his name. No quarterback named Andrew Walter would ever end up being good. Sometimes you have to scout the name just as much as the player. Anyway, Walter quickly proved he did not belong as the starting NFL quarterback, completing just 53% of his passes with 3 touchdowns to 13 interceptions, a 55.8 passer rating, and a 2-6 record as a starter. Walter was an absolute catastrophe in the pocket. He held onto the ball too long, had 0 pocket awareness, and was sacked 46 times. An insane number for 8 starts and 12 total games played. While the Raiders' offensive line was terrible, Walter's lack of mobility and slow decision-making made it even worse. His 3 touchdown to 13 interception ratio was historically bad, and his 55.8 passer rating was the worst in the league. He frequently misfired on easy throws and failed to generate any meaningful offense. The Raiders finished 2-14, largely because their offense was dead upon arrival under Walter, and that record landed them the 1st overall pick in the following draft. Walter's worst performance came in Week 8 against the Steelers, when he went 5 of 12 passing for 51 yards and an interception, in what was miraculously a win thanks to 2 pick-sixes by the Raiders' defense. It was one of several games where Oakland's offense failed to score a single touchdown. By the end of the year, the Raiders knew they had seen enough. Walter was benched and washed out of the league after 2008. Meanwhile, the Raiders responded by drafting JaMarcus Russell #1 overall in 2007, leading to another legendary quarterback disaster who may or may not have made it onto this list himself. Now back to San Francisco. By 2007, Trent Dilfer was long past his days as a Super Bowl winning quarterback with the Baltimore Ravens. At 35 years old, he was just supposed to serve as a backup and mentor to Alex Smith. But a season-ending injury to Alex Smith forced Dilfer back into a starting role. And considering the fact that, even in his prime, Dilfer was widely considered the worst quarterback to ever win a Super Bowl, it should come as no surprise that Dilfer had absolutely nothing left in the tank. Completed only 52% of his passes, threw 7 touchdowns to 12 interceptions, put up a passer rating of 55.1 and a 1-5 record as a starter. A complete and utter disaster. His worst game came in Week 4 against the Seahawks, when he threw 2 picks, fumbled twice, and completed just 13 of 33 passes in a 23-3 loss. He single-handedly cost the 49ers numerous games that year. San Francisco's offense was completely embarrassing with Dilfer under center, as they were dead last in the league in scoring in 2007. After suffering a concussion in Week 14, Dilfer was benched for Sean Hill and never played in the NFL again. His 2007 season ended his 14-year career, and it was painfully clear that he should have just retired before the season even started. Looking ahead to 2008, the Cleveland Browns entered the season with high expectations, largely due to Derek Anderson's breakout Pro Bowl season in 2007, when he somehow threw 29 touchdowns and led the Browns to a 10-6 record. But what followed in 2008 was one of the worst regression seasons for a quarterback in NFL history. Anderson went from Pro Bowler to toilet bowler in just 1 year, leading to his eventual benching and the Browns' offense completely collapsing. He completed only 50% of his passes, threw 9 touchdowns to 8 interceptions, put up a passer rating of 66.5 and a 3-6 record as a starter. He struggled with decision-making, overthrew open receivers, and regressed in every major statistical category. His completion rate was the worst in the league, and he constantly misfired on routine passes. His worst start came in Week 3 against the Ravens, where he completed just 14 of 37 passes for 125 yards and 3 interceptions in a 28-10 loss. Anderson was so bad that fans were calling for another all-time bust, Brady Quinn, to replace him mid-game. Things only got worse as the season progressed. Anderson was eventually benched for Brady Quinn after Week 9, and then Quinn got injured, forcing Anderson back into the lineup in Week 13, only for him to suffer an injury himself that ended his season. The Browns finished 4-12, and their offense failed to score a touchdown in the final 6 games of the year, a low point even for the Cleveland Browns. This season was the beginning of the end for Anderson as a starter. The Browns moved on from him after the 2009 season, and he bounced around the league as a backup before finally retiring in 2018. His 2008 collapse remains one of the most dramatic fall-offs for a Pro Bowl quarterback in NFL history, and makes him one of the most infamous one-year wonders at the position. Since you're still with me, please subscribe to help the channel grow so I can pump out more quality content for you. Back to the video. Okay, it's finally time, the moment you all knew was coming. By 2009, it was already clear that JaMarcus Russell was going to go down as one of the biggest draft busts in NFL history. The #1 overall pick in the 2007 draft, taken ahead of Hall of Fame caliber talents like Calvin Johnson, Adrian Peterson, Joe Thomas, Patrick Willis, and Darrelle Revis. Russell was expected to become the face of the Oakland Raiders and turn the franchise around. Instead, he became arguably the worst quarterback in NFL history, with his 2009 campaign slamming the door shut on his disastrous career. He completed just 49% of his passes, threw 3 touchdowns and 11 interceptions, put up a passer rating of 50, lost 6 fumbles, and had a record of 2-7 as a starter. All that being said, I'm not even gonna lie, I think JaMarcus Russell had the strongest arm of all time. I'm just gonna let some LSU highlights roll and let you be the judge. Still, Russell's lack of effort, poor mechanics, and complete failure to develop as an NFL quarterback were on full display in 2009. His passer rating was one of the lowest ever for a quarterback with at least 9 starts. He was routinely unprepared for games, often missing team meetings and showing up overweight and out of shape. Raiders coaches even resorted to handing him blank game tapes to test if he was watching film, only for Russell to return them and claim he had studied the game plan. The main reason he was a bust was because of the fact that he didn't mind being a bust. He didn't care how much of a fool he made of himself as long as the checks cleared. His worst game came in a Week 3 blowout loss to the Broncos, where he completed 12 of 21 passes for 61 yards and 2 picks, finishing with a 22.6 passer rating. It was one of the most pathetic quarterback performances ever seen on an NFL field. By December, the Raiders had seen enough. Head coach Tom Cable benched Russell for Charlie Frye and the legendary Bruce Gradkowski, signaling that Oakland had thrown in the towel on their former #1 overall pick. Russell never played another game in the NFL, as he was released in the offseason and rightfully never found another job in the league. This season cemented Russell's legacy as arguably the worst draft bust in NFL history. His lack of work ethic, poor attitude, and abysmal play made him a complete failure, and his 2009 season was the final nail in the coffin. 5 Hall of Famers taken in the first 15 picks in 2007, but Al Davis just had to have JaMarcus Russell. If you love NFL mini docs, click this playlist to watch more now, and subscribe for more NFL content.